Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to continue macroeconomics and we are going to move into different types of trade. Um, so, in this cartoon right here, we usually use this as one of our test questions. Um, if you notice, you have this man who represents corporate America, and he's saying free trade at last, free trade at last. Thank God Almighty, we have free trade at last. He has a whip in one hand, which represents the North American Free Trade Agreement, which allows America, Mexico, and Canada to trade freely throughout all three countries without any type of tariff. And then in the other hand, you have the World Trade Organization, which allows free trade throughout the world. On the left side, you have U.S. workers who are shackled by massive layoffs and vanishing worker rights. On the other side, you have workers abroad who are being paid slave wages and have no worker rights. And essentially, what is happening is due to free trade, U.S. jobs are being moved to other countries because they can pay it for cheaper. And because the people in other countries will work for cheaper, the United States workers don't really have anything to bargain with, and so they just kind of have to accept whatever they can get. This is the business cycle or the economic cycle. So the low is called a trough. When the business goes up or when the cycle goes up, it's called expansion. At the top, it's called a peak. At the bottom, it's called a recession. During times of expansion, there are more jobs, pay raises, businesses open, people spend money. Um, and the expansion is just when the economy is doing well. For the United States at this time, the economy has been expanding for the past 11 years. Just a few years into just 1 year into Barack Obama's first term, if you can imagine that, the country's economy has been expanding. Um, and it has continued all the way through the first 3 years of Donald Trump's terms. But due to COVID-19, we have entered a recession. In a recession, there are layoffs, pay cuts, businesses close, and people save money rather than spending money. Um, you hear people probably right now complaining about the economy, and that's because of the recession. Um, After Barack Obama's first term, or before that, like George Bush, we were in a time called the Great Recession. There was a housing market bubble that burst, and it created a time where people were having their houses foreclosed upon because they got cut rate mortgages or prime rate mortgages. Essentially, the banks were loaning out way too much money to people, and they were unable to afford their mortgages, and so that created a recession because a lot of people lost their houses at the same time. Then you have a depression, which is an unusually low trough. You probably heard about the Great Depression. Um, the cause of the Great Depression or stock market crash in October of 1929 because of speculation. Speculation is when you try and buy and sell stocks real quickly. So the companies that you're buying stock in never actually see the money and don't have money to develop their products or invest in marketing or anything. Um, and so while it looks like the companies are doing well, they're actually not because people are taking the money too quickly. Banks were losing money. People withdrew all their money. There's a great movie called It's a Wonderful Life, and there's a scene called, if you put it into YouTube, you can look up Bank Run. And essentially, everybody starts to freak out all at the same time. They all run down to the bank and try and take their money out. And if you do that, you can really put a bank out of business. Um, we have uh, we have things in place to prevent that now. Yeah. So businesses need money and they call in loans during the Great Depression, and businesses cut labor and capital. The effects is John M. Keynes, he figures out that the government can spend money to end a depression or recession by putting money into the economy, putting money into people's pockets. Then people go spend the money, and when people go spend the money, then the businesses are able to pay people. Uh, Trump just signed a stimulus package where every American that met the qualifications got $1,200. My wife and I got $2,400. We're supposed to spend that money to try and get businesses going. Some people need that money. They're paying their rent, buying groceries, whatever it may be. FDR's New Deal put people back to work, doing all kinds of different things. You'll learn about that in American history. The FDIC was created to insure your bank account up to $250,000. So if something like that were to happen, then as long as your bank account would be paid out by the federal government up to $250,000. And the SEC was created to regulate stock trading. Here are some pictures of the Great Depression. All right, so how do we measure the economy? First is GDP, which is the value of goods and services sold in a year. Unemployment rate, which is the percentage of people looking for a job and cannot find one. Consumer Price Index measures the change in average price levels of goods and services. And cost of living or standard of living measures the change in the average price level of goods and services. So what can we do to fix the economy? Well, that's called monetary and fiscal policy. Monetary policy is determined by the Fed, which is the Federal Reserve, and banks, and it deals with interest rates, bank reserves, and amount of money printed. The Fed is the bank's bank and the government's bank. That's where all money is created, stored, regulated. So that's where the banks get their money after the mints issue it. There are 12 different Federal Reserves. The one that North Carolina falls in is number 5. And actually, if you pull out a dollar bill, there will be a letter and a number on each dollar bill, and you can tell which Federal Reserve that it came from. The way you can tell, it will say A or 1 will be from Boston, B or 2 will be from New York, C or 3 will be from Philadelphia, and so on all the way through San Francisco. There is the Fed, the main Fed in Washington, D.C. It is no longer led by Janet Yellen. It is actually led now by Jerome Powell. You can look him up. So if the economy is not doing well, you use a loose policy where the Fed puts more money into circulation, they lower interest rates, and they lower reserve requirements, meaning that banks can lend out more money. If the economy is doing well, you don't want to lend out as much money. You want to raise interest rates and you want to raise reserve requirements. Then you have fiscal policy, which is determined by Congress and the president, and that deals with the amount of money that the government spends, and tax rates. So if the economy is not doing well and you want to speed it up, you lower taxes and you spend money, like is happening right now during this COVID time. Apparently, there's another bill going through the House. I think it just passed the House of Representatives, now going to the Senate, to spend $3 trillion more to give everybody $1,200 more. If the economy is doing well, you slow the economy. So you raise taxes, you spend less government money. And that's all I have for you today, guys. I hope you're doing well. Most likely tomorrow will be our last Play Posit. So that's awesome. You've all been doing great. I miss you greatly, and I hope you are doing well, and I hope to see you soon.